It's Pride Month, and we're going to be talking about some underrepped queerness in my favorite stories. Also, y'all, I have had some revelations. You're going to get some personal story time, and we're going to be breaking down asexual and aromantic representation in the romance genre. Hey y'all, and welcome to my vlog. My name is Erin, and today we're going to be talking about asexual and aromantic representation in the romance genre. Can you have asexual and aromantic leads in a romance? How might it affect the story? How do these identities even work? We're going to be talking about all of that and more in today's video. If you didn't already know, I'm on the ace spectrum. I had identified as demisexual pretty much since the moment I knew it existed, but over the course of researching for this video, I came to realize that I'm not demi, I'm just ace. I also came to realize that I'm on the aromantic spectrum. Don't worry if you don't know the details of asexuality or aromanticism, because we're going to go over all of that to make everything accessible. We're going to dig into what you need to know about Ace and Aro to write those characters, tropes that lend themselves well to those identities, and how to navigate those characters in your stories. Before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and ring that bell so you always know when a new video appears. All of the character-related things that we're going to be talking about today are in relation to the leads, not side characters. This is just because the side characters are not beholden to the main romantic plotline in the romance genre. So they're not going to have to navigate the particular complexities that go along with that. But that being said, please do include more Ace and Aro side characters in stories because we need rep for them everywhere. So let's start off with the basics. What is asexuality? Asexuality is the lack of sexual attraction. If you're on the far end of the spectrum, you may experience zero sexual attraction. And if you're further along on the spectrum as demisexual or gray sexual, then you might experience sexual attraction, but only in very specific circumstances. If you're allosexual, you experience normal levels of sexual attraction, and I don't even know what normal levels is, but whatevs. There are subcategories and micro-labels within asexuality, but the two biggest are going to be demisexual and gray sexual. Demisexuality just means that you don't experience sexual attraction without already having an existing strong emotional bond, and even then there's not any guarantee that sexual attraction will develop. And gray asexual just means that you experience sexual attraction infrequently, and it can occur with or without an emotional bond. What does aromantic mean? Aromantic is often paired up with asexuality, but they are not the same thing. Aromantic means that you don't experience romantic attraction. It's often shortened to aro, just like asexual is often shortened to ace. Some aromantic people might still engage in romantic relationships despite not feeling romantic attraction. Some aromantic people may also be asexual, but not all aromantic or asexual people are both. There's also demiromantic, which is similar to demisexual, in which a demiromantic person needs a strong emotional bond for romantic attraction to develop. The same goes for gray romantic, where their romantic attraction is just going to be experienced infrequently. What should you know about asexuality and aromanticism? There are a few important things to keep in mind. Number one, action and attraction are not the same thing. What I mean here is what a person engages in does not necessarily indicate what their attraction is. It's usually a decent guide to it, but not always. An asexual person might not experience sexual attraction, but they might still engage in sexual acts. And likewise, an allosexual person may feel sexual attraction, but specifically not engage in those things. But Erin, you say, why would someone engage in sexual behaviors if they're not experiencing sexual attraction? There are lots of reasons, but probably top of the list is that it feels nice. They might also do it to foster intimacy or to have biological children, or they're just curious. In the same avenue, aromantic people may participate in romantic behaviors without feeling romantic attraction. I've heard this referred to as performative actions in which they're trying to make their partner feel valued. Number two, libido does not equal attraction. You don't have to have a specific target for your sexual desires to want to have sex. Ace people can still be horny without directing that onto any individual person. This can often be really confusing for people because those concepts are so intertwined. An example that a friend of mine gave me was that if you're hungry but you can't find anything specific that you're craving, nothing really looks alluring, but you're still hungry. Of course, some people don't experience that hunger at all, and it's going to vary from person to person. Number 3, abstinence and celibacy is not the same as asexuality. Celibacy is the voluntary abstention of marriage and sex. This sometimes goes so far as to include abstention from kissing, from masturbation, from really any kind of physical contact with someone that they could be attracted to. You usually see celibacy in religious orders or people who have had a very strict religious upbringing. Abstinence means different things to different people, but in the broader sexual context, it just means that you're abstaining from penetrative sex. Depending on who you're talking to, this might narrow down to all sexual behaviors or sexual acts. People who engage in abstinence or celibacy might be asexual, but that is not a requirement by any means. And not all asexual people are abstinent or celibate. Asexual people may still experience arousal, but it's not directed at any one person. Asexual encompasses a lot of different identities, and there's lots of subcategories and micro-labels within there, but for the purposes of this video, we're going to be sticking with the big ones, which are asexual, demisexual, and gray asexual. These come under the adorable short names of Ace, Demi, and Grace. Number 4, aromantic people still have feelings. There are some crappy misconceptions that aromantic people are cold and unfeeling just because they don't experience romantic attraction, but that is simply not true. Think about it. Are you unfeeling towards your best friend just because you don't want to date them? Probably not. The same goes for aromantic people. They can have vibrant and fulfilling relationships with other people, they're just not romantic in nature. Number 5, these identities can be fluid. But just because they can be fluid does not mean that they are. Some people identify as Ace or Aro their entire lives. Some people only go through periods of time where they identify as those. The experience of your identity is intensely personal and can be influenced by a variety of factors. There is a myth that people who identify as asexual have experienced some sort of sexual trauma, and that's why they have no interest in sex. And while, yes, trauma can have an influence, that is certainly not the case for all people on the asexual spectrum. Many identities are fluid, and that doesn't apply specifically to Ace or Aro. Examining your gender, sexuality, and attraction is something that more people can and should do. It can help you find the identities that best reflect who you are. Now that we've gone over the basics, let's talk about Aro and Ace in terms of the romance genre. The basic requirement of a romance novel is for the romance to be a central plotline and for there to be a happily ever after or a happy for now ending. So how does this affect Ace and Aro characters? When I first started to see this topic be considered and discussed, there seemed to be some confusion as to whether Ace and Aro people could be represented in the genre. Admittedly, I was a little confused about aromantics in the romance genre, but that was also because I didn't understand aromanticism at the time. Now, I can firmly say that yes, both of those identities can find their home in romance. Let's talk about how. Things to consider when writing asexual or aromantic characters. Do they know that they're asexual or aromantic? If you're not on the Ace or Aro spectrum, you might be wondering how someone could just not know. Well, it's pretty easy to not know. A lot of things about your identity require some pretty deep introspection, and when it comes to asexuality or aromanticism, you are searching for the absence of something, not the presence of it. Additionally, if your character is a little older, they might just not have any access to resources that can explain those identities to them. One thing that can definitely trip up your characters is both a lack of understanding and a confusion of their understanding. That was me! The micro-label of agosexual or autocorosexual within asexuality is basically that ace people can still be aroused by concepts, by sexual media, or they may have feelings towards completely unattainable figures like celebrities or fictional characters. If you're confusing desire with attraction, then you just might have no idea that you're asexual. Additionally, some aromantic people still fantasize about romance. And again, that desire not being separated from attraction can make them think that they're not aromantic. If your characters do know that they're Ace or Aro, what labels, if any, do they use? Are they more comfortable with broader terms, or do they want more detailed ones? People may have multiple terms that describe their identity as well. In Heart and Soul, Tessa identifies as demisexual, and she doesn't dig any further than that. I also have other characters that are ace, demi-romantic, gray romantic, and demisexual that likewise stick to those broader terms. Does your character accept that they're on the Ace or Aro spectrum? Our society is very focused on pairing off, getting married, and having children. There's a lot of societal pressure, and it can be very traumatic for people to accept that they don't experience those attractions. Because of that pressure, your characters might feel like they can never achieve their happily ever after. What a happy life and happy future look like to them might not be what the wider world would view as happy. Story time! As an example for me, because I didn't understand what asexuality was or what it meant, I just assumed that I was broken for years. I would get crushes on people and I was fine with affection, but when it came to kissing or other sexual behaviors, I did not want people to touch me. Luckily, I have an extremely chill partner and I've gotten comfortable with a lot of things, but it was hell growing up. I just didn't date for years because it was such a hassle to try to navigate this identity that I didn't understand, I didn't have the words for, so I couldn't explain it to anyone, so I just didn't. I didn't want to accept that part of myself because in my mind, it meant that I would never find someone who would love me for who I was or be content with what I was comfortable with. When it comes to the aromantic part of my identity, I found that lithromantic fit me pretty well and was basically a cookie-cutter experience in my youth. Here's all the things for lithromantic. While I did experience crushes, I hated it when those crushes were returned. I used to get mad at people who would develop crushes on me and tell me about it. If someone liked me and didn't say anything, that was completely fine, but if they forced that knowledge on me, our friendship was always damaged. Some of you might hear that and be confused over how I ended up married. That'll be a fun story time a little bit later in the video. How has being asexual or aromantic shaped your characters? People can be absolute buttheads when it comes to asexuality and aromanticism. Not everyone, obviously, but it is not uncommon for even the queer community to say that they do not belong, or for people outside the queer community to say that Ace and Aro people need to be fixed. How have people behaved towards your character? Are they going to be comfortable discussing their identity and their desires with their partner? Are they concerned about potential backlash? A personal example would be in high school, where I had the reputation of being frigid because I didn't want to kiss who I was dating. My physician suggested I go to therapy to get over my lack of desire. I had one boyfriend kiss me while I was asleep because I had been avoiding it while I was awake. I had one boyfriend ask for a kiss for his birthday present so that I would have to stop avoiding it. I stopped dating, I stopped talking about it, and I pretty much continuously worried that I would never be loved. Being on the ace spectrum without knowing it, without having the words to describe it or explain it to anyone, was hugely distressing growing up. Being on the Aro spectrum and only wanting that one-way street with crushes got me the reputation for being fickle. I didn't understand why my feelings worked the way they did. I didn't know that aromanticism even existed, so I couldn't explain it to anyone. So I just had to deal with people being mad that I changed my mind after I had gone on a date with someone. And these are mild examples compared to some stories I have heard from Ace and Aro people. It really sucks that society has made this huge sense of shame around asexuality and aromanticism. So be sure that you don't skip over how your characters would have been influenced by that. What is your character's relationship with sex? Sex repulsion is focused around the asexual person being involved in sexual acts, but they might be fine with the general concept of sex. Sex aversion is when they are averse to the whole general concept. If your character is sex repulsed, what behaviors or acts are they repulsed by? What do they consider to be sexual behavior versus romantic behavior? Is it specifically intercourse or penetrative sex that squicks them out and other things are okay? Are they fine with the general concept, but they don't understand why they should be involved? Sex indifferent means that a person has no strong feelings about sex one way or the other. And sex ambivalent means that they have sort of an oscillating relationship with sex, where some things they might be totally comfortable with, some things they might be repulsed by, and that can depend on their experience and circumstance. And sex favorable means that they are comfortable with the concept of sex. They are likely to participate in sexual behaviors and sexual acts. How your character feels about sex, sexual acts, and physical intimacy is going to have an impact on how their romantic and sexual relationships develop. If your character is aromantic but not asexual, what is their relationship with sex? What romantic behaviors are they comfortable with, and which ones are off limits? Some aromantic characters are going to be super averse to behaviors that they identify as romantic ones. Some will be fine with behaviors that other people might consider romantic but they don't personally. Figure out what your characters enjoy, what they dislike, and what they're comfortable with. Please note that just as the identities of aromantic and asexual can be fluid, so too can their feelings on sex be fluid. Let me give you a personal example of how confusing and convoluted this can get. So when I was a teen, I was very sex repulsed. I did not want people to kiss me, I did not want them to touch me with sexual intention, and I did not want them to even think that I might be sexually active. That was all just wildly distressing to me. I was completely fine with physical affection and cuddling as long as the person had not expressed a desire for me. I was deeply uncomfortable with people that I personally knew being sexually active. But I was also completely fine with fictional characters, people in movies and books having sexual relationships. I was chill with masturbation. I sought out sexual education programs. I read sexy fanfics that were way too mature for me at the time. I hated dating, just everything about it. And the only reason that I ended up in a relationship that allowed me to get married is because my now husband knew and respected that I was uncomfortable with people expressing desire towards me, so he just never made a peep. We were friends for years, and we moved in together as queer platonic partners. Not that I understood what that term was at the time, but it exactly fits that description. And about a year into living with him, I was like, hey, I'm super comfortable with you if you were interested in pursuing a more physical and romantic relationship. I'd be fine with that. Not once in the 5 years of us being friends did he ever bring up sex or romance to me. Other people certainly tried to bring it up and forcibly make me acknowledge that he was in love with me. And I had to flat out tell him, stop, you're going to ruin it. And I did not want my friendship with him to end because people were forcing this concept onto me. But because he hadn't said anything, I could live in this state of deliberate denial because his feelings had not been explicitly stated. And although neither myself nor my husband understood or knew that I was aromantic, we both knew that I got super weird about relationships. But because he was super respectful of that, it allowed us to get a really strong friendship foundation. And it let me get to a point in my own time where I was comfortable with romantic behaviors and got a little more sex favorable. Will your characters be developing sexual or romantic attraction in the story? A lot of romance novels combine love and sex. If your character is demi or gray sexual or demi or gray romantic, do they develop those attractions for their partners? If they do, then you're able to proceed in pretty much a regular romance novel fashion. If they're not going to, then you're going to have to think ahead a little bit. What does a happily ever after look like for them personally? How will the development of either of those attractions change how the characters interact? How will it influence the future of their relationship? How does the love interest feel about their partner being Ace or Aro? Since we're talking about romance, I am leaning towards them being supportive, even if they might need a little bit more information to grasp what it might mean for their relationship. This is a great opportunity to have the love interest examine their own desires and what they need out of a relationship. If the love interest is also Ace or Aro, then you're going to have to navigate their own feelings about their identity and how they might interact or develop a bond with someone who shares part of it or all of that same identity. What does a happy ending look like for the love interest? Navigating the romance genre with Ace and Aro characters. Does a queer platonic relationship count as a happily ever after? If you're not familiar with what a queer platonic relationship is, and I should have explained this earlier in the video, but you're getting it now, It essentially blurs the lines between romantic and non-romantic relationships, or at least what society expects from each of those. Queer platonic relationships are as emotionally close as romantic relationships, but they are not romantic in nature, regardless of what they look like from the outside. Queer platonic partners are dedicated to one another, they may live together, they might even get married. Essentially, a queer platonic relationship is like if you got into a relationship with your best friend, regardless of whether you were attracted to them or not. You just know that you want to spend your life with them. In terms of whether or not it counts as a happily ever after in the context of the romance genre, I'm inclined to say yes. I cannot speak for all romance readers, but I personally would be content with a queer platonic relationship at the end of the story, even though it's not classically romantic. What are some romance tropes that lend themselves well to Ace and Aro rep? There are tons of them, and plenty are wildly popular. Marriage of convenience, arranged marriage, fake relationships, friends to lovers, enemies to lovers, rivals to lovers. These are all great examples of relationships that begin for reasons other than attraction. Marriage of convenience is the main plot in my first romance novel, Heart and Soul. A series of misunderstandings in the media lead to Tessa and Ungi entering into a marriage of convenience to preserve his reputation. Tessa is demisexual and panromantic, and Ungi is bisexual, but not on the Ace or Aro spectrum. From the beginning of the story, Tessa has a parasocial relationship with Ungi. He's an idol in her favorite group. A parasocial relationship is a psychological relationship that the audience forms with the people that they're watching. So you watching me right now could precipitate a parasocial relationship in which you feel like you know me, but I may know absolutely nothing about you. And while a parasocial relationship is not enough for many demisexuals to form a sexual attraction, I figure it probably doesn't hurt if you have that expanded experience with someone. In Heart and Soul, the parasocial relationship makes Ungi familiar to Tessa, and the marriage of convenience puts them in intimate circumstances. And that lets them get to know one another on a pretty intense basis. It's something that I chose to address in the story when Tessa does start to experience sexual attraction for Ungi, because she doesn't understand why she's experiencing those things as quickly as she is. Her best friend Kelly points out that Ungi is familiar to her. Tessa has been exposing herself to this guy for years. They have that parasocial relationship. And so it can kind of trick the brain into thinking that there is more intimacy there than there actually is. The combination of that and their developing friendship and their growing emotional closeness is what allows her sexual attraction to develop. In building Tessa's character, I knew that she was reasonably sex favorable. She was cool with masturbation, and she was open about discussing her needs. I also included a previous relationship in her past where she had developed sexual attraction there, and had had a comfortable and thriving sex life while in that relationship. On to the other tropes. Arranged marriages have been practiced all around the world for ages. It's a perfect trope to bring together characters where attraction is not the reason for them being together. You're putting the characters in intimate circumstances, and they have an investment in making that relationship work. Additionally, the characters are already in that classic happily ever after of marriage. They just have to make it a workable partnership. Fake relationships are so good for letting characters get to know one another. Besides it being one of my favorite tropes anyways, the fake relationship builds intimacy, it exposes vulnerability, and it forces proximity. It also tends to rely on performative romantic behaviors, which is something that a lot of aromantics probably have a fair bit of experience with, given our society's pressure to perform romance normally. Friends to Lovers is perfect to explore demisexual and demi-romantic characters. They have the solid foundation, they're comfortable with this person, and it gives you a lot of opportunity for those attractions to develop. Enemies to lovers and rivals to lovers are also bringing together characters for reasons beyond attraction. You're putting them in high-intensity situations, and there's plenty of opportunity for various experiences and actions to completely alter how these characters view one another. It's great. I shall also point out that the lower spice levels in a lot of romance means that you can go through the entire story really without mentioning sex, if you so choose. And that can be the perfect playground for your asexual characters, assuming they don't want to have sex or talk about it. I encourage you to do your own research. I will put a few resources in the description below for you. There's plenty more to learn about asexuality and aromanticism, and if you are writing a character who has either of those identities, you should be more deeply informed. The more you know about these identities, the better you'll understand your characters and the smoother your story will be. There are excellent resources online, and having Ace and Aro readers will help make your story feel more authentic. So that is all I've got for you today. Thank you so much for watching. Please leave me your romance recs that have asexual or aromantic leads in the comments. Check out my books if you like fantasy or romance. All my social media links will be in the description below. Like this video, subscribe, ring the bell so you know when the next one's coming out. And I will see you all in the next video. Bye!